When I came out of the Mahabharata, I came out with the realization that I couldn't go back into being a Bharatanatyam and Kuchipudi dancer alone. That the kind I was involved in was best suited through my performance. Because I saw the way women across the world related to Draupadi. And I thought that if just one character like Draupadi can have such a significant effect on women, then I should be using performance for the kind of social activism and to talk about the kind of issues that I want to. So I first created my first piece called Shakti, the Power of Women. And Shakti basically was created with a British director, and it looked at how language diminishes women. So for instance, we set it in a museum where a guide is reading out about various women and starts with Draupadi and says wife of so-and-so, daughter of so-and-so, mother of so-and-so, friend of Krishna, but nothing about her. But it was about language, and it was about, and therefore intellectual. We taught it in India. It was very, very, very successful. It was in some senses a breakthrough piece because this Bharatanatyam dancer sang and did martial arts and stood on her head and did all sorts of things. So a lot of the women's groups that I was working with here said, "Isko translate kar do." And I thought that there are so many more primary issues with women in India that the gendering of language is a long way away. And so I decided that I would create another piece that also addressed women's issues, but much more grassroots, things that mattered to them, things that happened to them. And one of the things that happens to Indians across the board is that mythological women are made into black and white cutouts and used to either make a goddess of us or a whore. So you either have Parvati or you have Surpanaka. There is no in-between. And I thought that Sita, considering that she was born out of fire in the earth and so on, couldn't have been such a walkover as made out to be. So I would start with Sita, and I read many of the 300 Ramayanas that exist. And it's called Sita's Daughters because I start with Sita and then go on to other women who could have been her daughters and women of today. So I talk about a teacher in Uttar Pradesh who is gang raped by her principal and professors and actually has the courage to take them to court. And I talk about the Chipko women and so on. And Sita's Daughters was done in English or Hindi or Gujarati. And I've done close to 700 performances from the White House to 8,000 women bidi workers in Nadiads in Gujarat. So it's gone to audiences of every kind, and because it's me talking to the audience, I always conceptualize it and contextualize it depending on what is in the newspaper in that city or that town today. So it becomes very immediate. And one day when I had been doing it for about 4 years, I got a very grubby postcard, and it was from a tiny village in Kutch, where 12 women ranging in age from 8 to close to 80, all of them victims of gang rape, had been isolated as bad women and were living under a tree, away from everybody and treated like pariahs. And they wrote to me on this postcard and said, "We hear you've done this show, will you come and do it for me?" And I will never forget that performance. Because after every sequence, they would say, "Beta, listen to what happened to me." And it was a 70-minute performance that lasted for 4 hours. And my musicians, all of whom were men, were just completely transformed by that experience. It was made compulsory viewing for all Supreme Court judges of all the ASEAN countries for over 10 years. And it was made compulsory viewing for women's universities in the SNDT group, that is 40,000 women, for again about 15 years. So it was, for me, a very significant piece, and it was a piece that seemed to touch many lives. And I then gave it up after 10 years of performing it, and in 2014, many of the women who had seen it as young women came back and said, "Our daughters need to see Sita's Daughters." So I have revived it again and continue doing it. Except as now Sita's granddaughters.